Um, Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the William H. Conkle Seminar Series in the Division of Plant and Soil Sciences. My name is Sven Verlinden. I am the Division Director for the Division of Plant and Soil Sciences. I'm really excited to have Jeff Skousen and Carl Zipper join us today to give a seminar about a book that they co-wrote or edited. And we have several other people that have contributed to this book also on this call. And so that's awesome. So I'm going to give you a little synopsis of who they are, and then they will give us a little bit of background on the story behind the book. So Carl E. Zipper is a professor emeritus of environmental sciences at Virginia Tech. He received a PhD from Virginia Tech in 1986 and was a member of the Virginia Tech faculty until he retired about a year ago in 2019, or 2 years ago now. He taught classes on environmental sciences to undergraduates and graduate students, and he served as the director of the Powell River Project, Virginia Tech's coal mine land reclamation research and education program for 21 years. He conducts research on environmental effects of Appalachian coal mining and on environmental restoration of mining influenced lands and waters. And then our other speaker today is Jeff Skousen, and he's a professor of soil science and land reclamation specialist at West Virginia University. He received his BS and MS in range science at Brigham Young University and a PhD in agronomy from Texas A&M University in 1985. He teaches two classes, Introduction to Environmental Sciences and Reclamation of Disturbed Soils. He conducts research on acid soils, mined land reclamation, revegetation, reforestation, biomass for bioenergy, post-mining land use, and acid mine drainage control and treatment. He consults regularly with coal mine operators, consultants, regulators, and landowners on reclamation and water quality issues. And I have really enjoyed having Jeff around as a colleague for over 20 years now, and I just really appreciate him and Carl giving us a seminar today. So take it away, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Sven. So Sven approached me about month and a half ago and asked me if I would give a brief synopsis of what this book is about. And so it was started out just to be a departmental seminar. And some of you know that ASRS, the American Society of Reclamation Sciences, has been doing a webinar series. So I just mentioned it to Bob Darmody, and he said, oh my gosh, why don't we just put that on as part of our ASRS seminar? And so there might be a few of you that from far-ranging areas that saw that from the ASRS website. And of course, I'm forcing my students in my reclamation class to watch this, or at least I've invited them to, and they can get a point extra credit if they write me a one-page summary of what we're doing. So anyway, welcome to all of you. I always tell my students, mute yourselves unless you have something to say. And of course, I'll rely on Carl and maybe someone else since I can't see all of your faces. So if there's any of you that want to break in or say something, you surely can. We're going to actually divide it into two pieces. Presentation I'm going to give, I developed about 6 months ago. And so it's reasonably short, 20 to 25 minutes, unless I get long-winded. And then I'm going to turn it over to Carl. So I'm going to cover some of the information that I thought was most important in the book. And then Carl's going to follow it up with sort of a philosophy and why we wrote this book, and maybe some perceptions and perspectives from him. So anyway, that's where we're going to start. And so here we go. Here it is. I wanted you to see on Amazon, you can buy it. It is now available. There's only 7 in stock, so you should hurry up. So here's how it all started. I took my first reclamation class in 1981 at Texas A&M University from a guy named Kirk Brown. And the book that we used in that class was this old at the time it was pretty young, 1978 at first edition of a proceedings which had occurred in 1976 called Reclamation of Drastically Disturbed Lands. So that was our textbook. I love this. I was actually working on a reclamation project with Texas Utilities on a big lignite mine. I nearly memorized that book, and I loved the guys that wrote it. And so, of course, I was a relatively young fellow, so these were the cool people in reclamation. So I came to WVU and I started teaching the reclamation class here. John Sensendiver had taught a class on reclamation for a few years, so I took that over. And so I used the old Schaller and Sutton 1978 edition until we finally developed a second edition of Reclamation of Drastically Disturbed Lands, and that came out in 2000. So I quickly adopted that book and was fortunate enough to write a couple of the chapters in that book. It's a great book, still is, but as I continued to teach my class, it was getting older and older. So I was looking for additional reclamation textbooks. And so there's this one from SME that Carl and I wrote a chapter in it. I think it came out in 2013, but again, it didn't cover all the things that we needed in reclamation. Here's a good friend of ours in China that published a book, old Jinky Hu, but he, again, it didn't cover the things that I really wanted. So you're probably thinking, well, 20 years has gone by. Why don't we do a third edition? Holy cow, it's been 20 years. We should do a third. And I thought, I've got enough. I've been in this business long enough. I could probably drum up some business, some of the chapters for this. So of course I knew I needed help. So I contacted my good buddy, Carl Zipper down at Virginia Tech. He is one of the most productive researchers I know, a prolific writer, a great editor. And he and I have written, I should have counted up how many we've done together, Carl, but it's a dozen or more at least. And the best thing about it is he just retired. So here was a guy I could just load up the whole thing on. And so I pitched this idea to Carl about doing the third edition of the reclamation book. And I'm sure Carl's got his own version of this, but here's my version. He says, nope, it is too big, too much to do. No, you're crazy, Skousen. But he did say, what I want to do, or what we should do, is write a pretty scholarly book on the impact of mining on Appalachia. And out of all the people, that could do that, maybe Carl and I could do that. So we wanted to address what mining's done to the landscape, the vegetation, wildlife streams, economies, and communities. So it's a little bit bigger than just the science. It also includes some of the societal things. So no book had ever been written on this kind of holistic approach. So I swallowed and said, this is a great idea. So off we went. So we started choosing people who would be what we considered really great people to write chapters on their expertise areas. And so how this developed, we first did these first, and of course there was a lot of discussion around this, but the first three were on the kind of the history, how the Appalachian area developed, geology, mining techniques, and then of course the resources that are here, vegetation, plant communities, wildlife. And then the water section there with hydrology, AMD, and aquatic life, that one on post-mining, and then this kind of unique section on human and societal health. So here's just a couple. Carl and I knew quite a bit about Appalachian history. We got Mary Beth to help us. Erickson and Daniels from Virginia Tech on the geology. We wrote the mining and reclamation one. Kenton Senna and Jennifer Franklin, a few others helped on vegetation communities. Anyway, you get the ideas. I wrote the one on mine soils. There's big Chris Latuma and others that he got to help on that wildlife chapter, great chapter. And Elise Clark and Carl did this really good chapter on stream contaminants. Natalie Cruz and Lewis McDonald did the acid mine drainage. Anyway, you get the idea. Some of the authors were people that did their graduate degrees at WVU or Virginia Tech or Kentucky and have moved on, but they've all worked here. The last ones were on economics and human health. And then we wrote this last chapter on transition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you a couple of high points of each of the chapters, because I want you to get a flavor for what we tried to do in this book. So the first one is on historical concepts. And so here we describe the landscapes, the ecosystems, how the area was settled by humans, the economic history, industry, and how coal production kind of ebbed and tide over that long-term period and coal's legacy. So here's just one of the things that we put in there, and these are the Paleo-Indian artifacts. And as you'll note, our Appalachian area is right here, where there's just not very much. Again, any of you that have been down there know this is rugged country. This doesn't make for building mounds and having nice big settlements like in Ohio and all the surrounding areas. So again, this Anderson guy in Tennessee is really good at this stuff. And then we do outline Appalachia's production percent here all along. And of course, it really didn't drop off until about the 1970s when the Powder River Basin in Wyoming really kicked in, some of the western mining. And we see all of that mining, or much of that coal, coming from that region, with continuing decline of the Appalachian coal. And here's another illustration of that same sort of thing, where the Powder River Basin kind of came in. But again, all of them are declining right now. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I wanted to use this one. So if we're at 1935 or so, you can see that about this much of the area, or the primary energy, came from wood. Appalachian coal was all of that. Other coal was this, petroleum was this, and gas and hydro. So anyway, the point I'm making is that had a huge bearing. If we move out here to 2010 or so, or 2005, you can see wood, coal from Appalachia, other coal, petroleum, of course, and oil, and then gas, hydro, nuclear, and of course the renewables have come on. So anyway, that's an interesting graph to consider how things have changed over time. Now this is a graph that you're going to see, or this map you're going to see a couple of times. And the importance of this map will be more apparent to you. But what we try to illustrate here are the big coal counties, those that had huge amounts of cumulative coal production. And so they're the dark blue ones, and you can see those. And so this is Kanawha County, Boone, Logan, Mingo. Let's see, Pike. What's that one? Martin?
Martin.
Yeah, and this is Buchanan, I think, in Virginia.
Again.
Yep, and this is Wise County. That one's Perry. What's this one? Oh, well, I should know it. I wrote them down here. Harlan. So those are the big ones. But again, we've had some big coal counties here also. And of course, the big deep mines up here in Greene County, Monongalia, and in Ohio County. So keep that map in mind, and I'll come back to that as we look at metrics in those areas. So here's another one. So all of this has had a human health price and a cost to it. So here's the miners that have, and look at that scale from 1900 clear out to 2000. So it kind of petered out right around here. And look at the fatalities here. Those are these gray dots. So of course, all of you know about some of the hard working conditions that were there, but those have declined greatly until there's just hardly anybody killed in a mine anymore. But there's also this one that probably we ought to think a little bit more. So this is kind of an illustration of black lung disease, CWP over here, lung impairment. And note, the longer you're in the mine, so this is the greater than 25 years, and that's declined greatly, but then we've seen this gradual incline, and there's some other factors involved in that incline. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that even though Appalachian coal has built this country, that it has won World War II, you know, all that sort of stuff, and has provided a really great standard of living for most of us here in this country, there has been a cost associated with it, particularly in Appalachia, where so much of that was done. All right, so that's the first chapter. The second chapter is, it'll go a little quicker. This is on regional geology. And I wanted to just, again, align a little bit. So the Piedmont, the Blue Ridge, Valley and Ridge, and the Appalachian Plateau, which is where most of the coal mining is. And I wanted to show you this kind of important boundary here called the hinge line. That hinge line essentially separates the northern high sulfur coal from the southern low sulfur coal. That has huge implications when it comes to the environment, for water and for, so this is the map that we use in the book, where we talk about the Pocahontas Basin, kind of the low sulfur area, versus this Dunkard or Monongahela Basin that's north with the high sulfur rocks. And so that goes all the way from the Pocahontas Seam, New River, Kanawha groups, Pottsville, Allegheny, all the way up to the Dunkard group. And so in their chapter, they talk about these sulfur and carbonates and the rock types and the mine soils that result from those geologic materials that are busted up. Here's another way to look at it a little bit, and that is where this hinge line is. It sort of follows I-79, but it's not exact, of course. And then there's this funny little divergence here. And I'll talk about this divergence a little bit later. Okay, chapter 3, we're moving. So chapter 3 is the one that Carl and I wrote on mining and reclamation. So this is an old OSM drawing, but here's the underground methods on this side of the diagram. And on this side are the surface mining methods. So we describe both. We discuss room and pillar mining, continuous longwall mining, and of course the early shoot and shove mining, along with contour and of course the mountaintop and valley fill. We also discuss some of these other things, reclamation laws, the abandoned mine lands, and the resulting landscapes that come from those. So here's some of our pictures describing room and pillar mining. And then of course, here's longwall, which is produced so much coal. I wanted to just point out, we make an estimate of how much land has been disturbed by surface operations, but I don't know of anybody that's ever made an estimate of how much land area has been undermined. And I think Carl made the point that since 3 or 4 times more coal has been produced by underground mining, makes you wonder that if that's not concurrent with how much happened on the surface. So then we talk about the surface mining methods. Probably most of you know about shoot and shove mining in the old days when the miners just came in, there were no laws. They moved this overburden off, threw it over the side of the hill to get to the coal seam here. And then they just kept moving. There weren't any laws that required them to reclaim it, reduce the high wall. And so we have these sort of acidic materials on the base. And so we have lots of pictures of those sorts of things. So we use these kind of pictures. So they don't revegetate very well, often rocky and acidic, but there they are. And unless someone has lots of money or has a remining project, that's how they stay for years, because nobody is responsible to come in and reclaim those areas. Today, we've passed laws that require the high wall to be reclaimed. So we do it to this term called approximate original contour. So we push that back and make these into nice pastures, hayland on the mountaintop jobs or the bigger jobs down south. Sometimes we'll go to forestry. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, the big mountaintop, ridgetop mining that has gone on blasts the tops of these off a little bit. Of course, we rebuild the mountain on top. But remember, when you blast consolidated rocks and make them unconsolidated, you make excess spoil. And so that's why we build these excess spoil valley fills so that we don't pile the rock higher than what was there before. That's illegal. So you have to get rid of some of that excess spoil. And so they do it in these valley fills. Lots of controversy, of course, around valley fills, how they're constructed and where they're put, and the effects on streams or aquatic life in these bottoms. All right, there we go. There's chapter 3. So chapter 4 is on mine soils. So Lee and I and Carl wrote that one. And again, that same picture, once it has stopped moving, it now becomes a mine soil. It's not spoil material anymore. It is a mine soil. And so even though it's terrible and doesn't grow many plants and it's very erodible, that's what these plants have to grow in unless we come in and do some mitigation. We've dug lots of pits in these things. Sometimes they're just full of rocks and other times they're full of pyritic material so that nothing grows on the surface. Again, with passage of laws, that required topsoil to be saved and then respread on these things. And of course, the better the topsoil, the thicker it is, the better. So we have a whole bunch of these kinds of soils that have been created since SMACRA, particularly in the northern part of our state in Pennsylvania, where we have this topsoil layer of 6 to 10 inches sitting over this blasted rock material. So again, the productivity of the site is based essentially on what kind of soil material was put back on the site. All right, chapter 5 is Kenton and Jennifer and Rebecca. They talk about these ecoregions here, the Blue Ridge, of course, the Ridge and Valley, the Central Appalachians, and the Western Allegheny Plateau. Again, this area is such a tremendous area. It's one of the most beautiful and diverse forests in the world. And of course, much of our mining is occurring on this landscape, which is just so diverse and so beautiful and full of biotics, and vegetation and animals. On these old sites where there wasn't very many reclamation laws put in, you know, they just pushed this stuff over the hill. If the material that they pushed over the hill was good, you know, man, it revegetated quite quickly with seeds from the surrounding forest. And so here's a 48-year-old site that, you know, unless you knew better and the landscape didn't differ from that surrounding it, you might see very similar tree species as the surrounding forest and maybe similar things in the understory. So if we could wait 50 years, many of these old sites where there was no compaction and no acidic material placed on the surface, they might look really quite well. But again, with the passage of SMACRA, replacing topsoil on the surface, compacting it, the idea was to put herbaceous vegetation to control erosion so that the landowners could have pasture and hayland. Now, these are very aggressive species. They hang in there and persist for a long time. And so very few, not very often does anything from the native forest move in. We have this set of invasive species that moves across these and can establish in that thick, aggressive sod. So like autumn olive and black locust, they'll move on to these, which is an unfortunate thing. If they were maintained, a farmer cut and bale the hay off of it, of course, that would keep the woodies out, but that's not what occurs on all of them. So you get this sort of nasty ecosystem that's got compacted soils, kind of junky trees, and a pretty poor understory. And so we have thousands of acres of those. In the 2000s, we decided that maybe we needed to switch off that herbaceous aggressive forage and try to go back to trees, which was often there before. And so that began the Appalachian Regional Reforestation Initiative, or the whole effort in trying to replant high value trees on these areas again. So that's what we've been trying to do on those. All right, here's Chris's chapter on terrestrial wildlife. Great chapter. It covers all of these things: salamanders, reptiles, the turtles, the birds, raptors, bats. So I can't do justice to this, so I'm going to show you 3 or 4 pictures, and you'll have to listen to Chris's talk when he gives it. So here's the small mammals and the larger ones. So they make a point about many of these aquatic species are negatively impacted. And no doubt, because especially in the early days, they mined through these streams. Today, they can't quite do that. But even if you do mine them or reconstruct these streams, or that this water receives water from the mined areas, it's pretty tough to return these species back into those systems, at least in a very short time frame. So generally negatively impacts many of these aquatic species. They do point out that there are a number of bird species that like the open area. And of course, they respond favorably to these more open grassland areas. But those that require the forest, of course, haven't done so well. All of you probably know that bats are an important thing here. And anytime that there's bat habitat on these lands, that puts a big skid on the permit. They have to make sure and identify where those are, try to mitigate, try to make other bat habitat available to them. So bats have been a major important part of this. And then skipping all those other things, here we are with the elk. Elk have been reintroduced, particularly in the southern part of West Virginia into eastern Kentucky. Lots of press about that. Most of these have come from Wyoming or Colorado. And, so anyway, great chapter on wildlife. Carl and us wrote this thing on conversion options. What can we do with these properties after a while? And so we know that we've gone to these aggressive forages. And so as long as we're producing hay on them, they do quite well. We know about the forestry, that we can plant trees and that they can grow at reasonable rates. But what about some of the other things? Some of you know that I've been working on biomass crops, bioenergy crops on these areas. And again, productivity is almost completely based on what soil resource was put there or that is developed on the site during the last 20 years or so. Here's some of the stream restoration techniques that have been used. And again, it takes time for these streams to develop, function, and structure like they did before. And then we do talk about some of the other bigger things that we've hoped will kind of come in. Here's some of the solar farms that can come on some of the big jobs. And if you're nearby to a power plant or another place where you can get on the grid, that would be great. But it's not all peaches and cream, that's for sure. So you got to make sure to select the right site. And then there has been dozens of places where business development parks or other kinds of social things have developed. All right, chapter 8 is on acid mine drainage. So Natalie and Lewis.
That's a great one.
They show this table in here that stream miles impacted by coal mine drainage. And you'll note here's Kentucky, here's Pennsylvania, here's West Virginia. We always seem to have the most. I think it's because we actually, well, never mind. We actually measure it. But, and part of that is I've always wondered why Pennsylvania is so much less when they have way more acid mine drainage than we do. But anyway, that's the way the table came out. So in their chapter, they talk about different ways of treating it, like the use of limestone dosers. And this is particularly for some of the abandoned mine lands. And here they're using this this water wheel system. And then there's a nice section on passive mine drainage treatment. And here's just the steel slag leach bed, some of the plumbing that goes on. So there's a nice section on that. All right, here's a great chapter, chapter 9 on contaminants that are in the non-acid, so not iron and aluminum manganese, but some of the other things like cations and anions, TDS, some of the trace elements. And I wanted to this is a really great figure. We saw something like this in a seminar a couple of weeks ago, but I like this idea of unmined hill slope here. So coal seams act as an aquifer, contributing water to the subsurface soil. And so it moves down through the soil. And of course you have some groundwater moving down. But when you move, and of course it comes up through into the streams. But once you get over here where you have the mined hill slopes, especially the contour mines or the underground mines, it changes the hydrology and the contributing constituents to a stream considerably. So in the southern part of the state, you get a lot of these hardness elements, magnesium, calcium, bicarbonate. Of course, there's always sulfate that come from the mined area. And so once you disturb the rocks, you get these. In the northern part of the state, you'll see more iron and aluminum and acidity, sulfuric acid, which come into the streams. But you also have the contributions from mined out areas in the underground mine. And of course, that interrupts how the water moves through that whole system also. So it's a kind of a unique thought of how to figure out how these different constituents are introduced into streams. And here's a good graph that shows what, and specific conductance is a good barometer for how many total dissolved solids are in the water. So here's specific conductance. Of course, this is that big heavy coal county, and of course up here in the north where we have the high sulfur coal. So we get lots of ions in both places, but you'll note that when we just use sulfate here, tracks
We're done for today. He said 8 o'clock's fine to be here.
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I'll be here tomorrow at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So, I mean, you gotta give or take like maybe 10,
Somebody
15 minutes.
needs
Fine.
Because
Fine.
it takes me.
Can everybody turn off their mic, please?
Yeah.
All right, and then here's the chapter on aquatic life, and it talks about biofilm, macroinvertebrates, crayfishes, mussels. And so I'm just going to put a couple of things here. Here's a characteristic kind of spinal deformity due to selenium toxicity. And then they have this graph in here, which I also think is just great. And that is, so look over here, index of biotic integrity. Here's a healthy stream before mining. Of course, when that mining occurs, it drops it down to some level, and it sort of remains there until you start reclaiming. Once you reclaim, it will bump its biotic integrity up to some level, and it will sort of lay there until maybe some other kind of mitigation activity. So I don't know what the trajectory is of this, if it goes normal or up or down. Of course, time does tend to help heal some of these wounds, but it often takes another mitigation activity. All right, number 11, this is a great chapter. So this was written by George and Carl. It talks about how the economics have gone on. And so here's this same graph sort of using a table, but it represents this thing. So here's our big coal counties here, and then some surrounding ones. And so what we've done, or what Carl did, was he looked at several different economic metrics here. And so this one's population. So I want you to watch the scales here. This is time down along here, and watch this one, what we're talking about. So this is population trends. You can see the US population, and these were all normalized at 1 in 1969. You can see that the US has grown, but look what's happened to the coal counties, the big coal counties, so the real big dark line, and then maybe the gray line, or the other dark line. So it grew, and then of course we've seen this drop off since about 1980, and it continues to drop in terms of population trends in those counties. Here's unemployment rates. Same sort of thing from 2000. All of you know that unemployment really went up in 2008 with the economic downturn. And of course, we had another one in about 2011. And so you can see the big coal counties and unemployment has been quite high, with the US tracking there. Here's the average wages and salary. Here's the average for the US. And of course, the big coal counties, again, mechanized, highly advanced, pretty high paid, skilled workers. And then here's the other ones for the other counties in the Appalachian region. And of course, here's poverty. So from 2000, boy, in the big coal counties, we've been at this 20 to 23, 24%. The US has been around this 12%. And you can see some of the other Appalachian counties in between that. Look at that big coal county. All right, and then to follow up on that with the human health, great chapter again. I'm just going to show a couple of graphs out of the book. It's really great. So here we have life expectancy from 1960 all the way up. And of course, many of you probably, I didn't know this, but Hawaii has the best life expectancy of any state in the United States. Here it is for the United States life expectancy. Here it is for West Virginia and Kentucky. You can see that's getting wider. Whew, don't want to see that. But here's the really interesting one. Here's the big coal counties. So in 1980, it was that much lower, and that's for Boone, Logan, Mingo, and Pike. And then you see this jump to 2014. It looks like it's probably tracked about the same line there in terms of trend, but look how much lower it is compared to the West Virginia in general, and of course, the United States. And then here's mortality rates for the big coal counties from 1980 or so. It's continued to diverge from some of the other counties in this region. Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure that it's more complex than what we're making it out to be, because here's our big coal counties on this side, but here's mortality rate in the entire region. And so you can begin to appreciate that there is sort of a perennial problem with mortality rates in this Appalachian region. So there's more to it than just coal. And then just this last one. I thought this was illustrative, where we have Ethiopia, which has declined greatly in mortality rate. But here it's good old Mingo County in West Virginia. We're almost to that. And of course, the United States is this one down here. So a lot of work to do. So if I were going to sum that one up, I would say that population health has improved dramatically across the globe and the US since the 1970s, but these same health metrics have seen much less improvement, and in some cases, no corresponding improvement in the coal counties. And that extends to life expectancy, mortality, infant mortality, and low birth rate. So, and then last chapter, and we'll wind it up for Carl. And I think I'll leave this largely to Carl to talk about, because I want his perspective on this. And there are some really great things about this area. Of course, I love going down there. I have some really great friends, wonderful people down there, but I think these Appalachian assets are becoming more valuable. We have a workforce that's down there that are quite highly trained. Some of them aren't working right now. It's a beautiful area, even in spite of some of these abandoned lands and landscapes, and there's low population. Mine lands are an underutilized resource, and we know that they're getting better with maturity. And if there's further reclamation that can go on, they can provide multiple benefits. So this combination of quality of life enhancements, environmental restoration, some of these new energy opportunities really do provide an opportunity for us to really make an impression on this area down here. Just a couple of other slides as I wind up. So there are other things that we can be doing down there agriculturally, but maybe recreationally. This was built on a whole series of abandoned mine sites in the southern part of the state, huge Bechtel Summit operation. So a lot we can do. So what a great book. My goodness, it has tons of information in it and is well written, of course. And oh my, there's only 5 left in stock. They're flying off the shelf. You have got to hurry up and order them. All right. All right, I'm going to turn it now to Carl. Let me unshare. And Carl, if you want to go ahead and share, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, let's see. Let me get full of my Zoom buttons here. Okay, here you go. Share. There we go. How are we in business? Let me go full screen PowerPoint.
Yep.
How's that?
Full screen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyhow, I'm gonna put it in a little smaller nutshell than Jeff did, and based on Jeff's review of so many details from the book, it makes my life, my job here fairly easy. But in a nutshell, the focus for the book is the legacy of coal mining in Appalachia. Right? Coal has been mined extensively over more than 2 centuries, as we all know, and it's clearly left its mark. There's no question about that, as certainly as Jeff has reviewed in some sense. But before we get into that, as Jeff already mentioned, one of the things we wanted to be clear about is just the important role that Appalachian coal played in the development of our great nation, in the development of the American economy as a world leading economy. I mean, when you look back at the history from especially the late 1800s through the, especially the late 1800s through the mid 1900s, I mean, Appalachian coal was essential to our economy. So those are the benefits that have been gained, or part of the benefits that have been gained from all that mining. Although we live with the aftermath of much of that mining, or the residents of that area live with the aftermath of much of that mining today. Appalachian mining's footprint has grown through time, that it's hard to understate the impact that the mining has had on certain areas, on the most intensively mined areas. The county where Lee Daniels and I work, Wise County, Virginia, about 80% of the county is in the coal field, the Appalachian coal field. And of that Appalachian coal field area, almost 20% of it has been surface mined, and additional areas have been undermined with, by the deep mining. And that's and other counties in the Appalachian coal field are like that as well. Just that extensive mining has left its mark. That's very clear. Mining has had a lasting impact on the land. Land forms and landscape structure, soils, plants, and terrestrial wildlife. And as Jeff just reviewed, we thanks to our excellent chapter authors who have expertise in these areas. And in each of the chapters, we try to, I guess, summarize the status of the mined land resources using the best scientific information that is available. And of course, we've been fortunate to engage parties who have expertise in these areas, who have devoted devoted years, or in some cases their careers, to studying these issues. So and the Appalachian coal field is very well studied. Jeff and I have been down there since the 80s, and others have as well. So there's a lot of this story to be told, but the mining has had an impact. Although there is great potential for these lands to be utilized, the majority of mined lands in Appalachian coal field are basically covered with invasive plants, or have occupied by novel ecosystems that have a significant component of invasive plants. The wildlife is very unique, as Chris Latuma and Mark Ford's chapter recognized, and there are some very unique environments on the mined areas of Appalachia. Mining's impact on water is also extensive and long-lasting, and those impacts include hydrology, effects on acidity and alkalinity, release of major ions, release of trace elements, and of course biota, the biota that reside in these aquatic ecosystems. And the water impacts go well beyond the mine sites themselves. In Virginia, we've been doing some work in the Powell River, and the effects of mining and the water are easily detectable more than 100 kilometers downstream from the mined areas that occur in the headwaters. And these, the effects of mining are evident in large areas of the Appalachian coal field, far beyond the actual mines themselves. And again, this is all just part of the legacy of coal mining. The communities, as Jeff just reviewed some of the data on, have high rates of unemployment. The major coal mining counties that are outside of the metropolitan areas, we're excluding Monongalia and Kanawha counties from this category, because they have other forms of economic support, the university and the center of West Virginia government. But communities in major coal mining counties have high rates of unemployment and poverty, low rates of formal education, and poor health outcomes relative to other eastern areas. And of course, the social scientists, I guess there's debates on whether coal is the cause or how directly coal is the cause. And we don't go into those debates. The question, the point that, the points that we review are the fact that these are the conditions in these major coal mining counties. And of course, these conditions are very persistent and will influence these counties as we go forward in time. I think probably everybody on this call is very well aware of the decline of the Appalachian coal industry that's occurred over the past decade. And when we try to look at this in a historical context, this one thing about it that's remarkable is how rapid it has been. Back in 2011, the industry was doing pretty well. Prices were high. Production was comparable to past eras. And then all of a sudden it just dropped off the table. And we've seen just a very rapid decline. And of course, that rapid decline affects the economies of the areas that depend on coal. Again, there's been much debate over what is the cause. Was it the war on coal? But it's clear that over that same time period, the cost of natural gas dropped dramatically. The price of natural gas dropped dramatically. The price and capability of solar photovoltaic equipment the price has dropped dramatically while the capability has increased. And of course, we've become much more aware of the climate issues that are associated with coal and the climate benefits that will come from moving away from coal. So based on that, we certainly do not expect any reversal of this declining coal production trend. So where does this rapid change leave coalfield communities? And I guess in a shortest answer would be facing an uncertain future while bearing coal's legacy. And that's pretty much what we tried to cover in this book. But of course, it's not all gloom and doom. As Jeff just stated, Appalachia's people are talented, right? The climate is favorable and its unmanaged coal mine landscapes are extensive and potentially of value in an increasingly crowded world, especially with the need to transition our economy from fossil to renewable energy sources, non-carbon based renewable energy sources. Just these coal mine landscapes have great potential value if things continue moving in that direction. So just to conclude, Jeff and I extend our thanks to 29 contributing authors, especially the chapter lead authors. And we also thank you for your attention and for spending time with us. It's great to have so many people in the audience. Thank you. So I'll stop sharing now and turn it back over to the seminar organizers.
Well, I just want to, again, thank you, Carl. Thank you, Jeff, for this great presentation. And I would like to open it up for questions now. So I think this is a great moment to just get these authors and get maybe their take on the approach or impact of this book.
Before you start there, I just probably ought to mention that any questions you have probably can be answered by the book. So you need to buy the book. I wish Carl and I got a royalty, but we don't. So.
Or get it through the library.
All right.
At Virginia Tech, it's available through the library, and my guess is it's available through WVU as well as an electronic copy.
That was my question. I was wondering if WVU if it was going to be available to check out in the library for us students.
I'll make that my project.
Thanks, Dr. V. Appreciate it.
Again, there is an electronic version that's being circulated as PDFs, and according to Springer, that's one of the main ways in which the books are distributed these days. Is one of the main ways I read them, so I certainly understand that.
So I do have a question. So this book is really careful not to point a finger at any particular outfit or any particular reason why some of these conditions exist. Is there a specific reason for that, and can you expand on that? I mean, obviously, I assume it's because you just want it to be very factual and not really get into subjective statements. But can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Let me try first, Carl, and then you probably can.
We did it that way because
Oh, do you want to go ahead? Go ahead, Carl.
say we did it that way. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we operate as objective scientists. You know, that's been our entire rationale in terms of dealing with this stuff for the last 40 years. We operate on the basis of data. And once we get into subjectivity, we're into a whole different realm, and not one that I personally am comfortable with in terms of professional, you know, my professional activities. As an individual, I'll go subjective. I'll tell you exactly what I think. But as an objective scientist, I try to, we've been dealing with these coal issues for literally for 40 years. And the way we've always done it is just on the basis of the facts and the resources that are in front of us without pointing fingers and looking to make things better and not point fingers at why they're not as good as they might have been.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And of course, there's a wide range of reclaimed lands. And some operators were better than others, of course, but we also recognize that they responded to laws. And so much of the disturbance that went on during the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s even, there just weren't any laws. And so they were making profits. They were mining coal and selling it. And it wasn't until, you know, that they were more or less forced to do some of these reclamation procedures that they did them, which is typical of anywhere.
Mm-hmm. So there are some questions in the chat. Can you see those, Jeff?
Yeah, I can. Not all of them though, but let me see. So one is, what in writing this book, did you identify any areas that you think are still in need of further research? I know Carl's been thinking about that one. So Carl, why don't you, what else do we need to do to identify some of these legacy problems?
Well, I think we're still trying to untangle some of the water effects. There's no question about that. It's clear that the biota is impaired in these mining affected waters. And the easy answer is to say that it's major ions. But my sense is there's more going on than that. So that's certainly a research issue. I saw a question in the chat earlier. One of you asked about the soil biota, soil animals, basically, soil macroinvertebrates. And I know there's been a lot of work with that in Europe. Our friend Jan Fruus has done a lot of work with soil macroinvertebrates on mine sites, how rapidly they inhabit mine sites. But in my experience, Jeff, I'm not aware of any studies of that in Appalachia. And my observations from digging a hole now and then in the mine soils is I don't see too many animals in those mine soils. And I think that would be that'd be a pretty good project for somebody to, so there's clearly a lot more to be learned, but also I would say that if we could reach a point where the economics and the industry and the regulatory structures, et cetera, were creating reclamation outcomes that are consistent with the best practices that we know today, I think that would also be a good thing. Right now, the science of ecological restoration is way ahead of the practice, But I guess that's just, that's emblematic of the fact that the science is moving ahead pretty rapidly. Whereas it's the mining industry is they're a big boat, and they don't turn the corner as quickly sometimes as we researchers would like to see.
And just to add on to that, there is a big difference between the amount of soil that is placed on mines in the northern part of our state and then versus the southern part. And so some of those studies have gone on up here in Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia. But you're right, not much down in the southern part of the state, largely because many of those weren't topsoiled very well. So there isn't much biota in those soils anyway. But agreed, more could be done. There is one here that says, let's see. Well, there's this one on my kind of comment on whether Pennsylvania really measures their acid mine drainage streams or not. I'll save that one for OSM. Future coal system. Oh, what do you see for the future of met coal versus thermal coal in Appalachia? That's a little bit more detailed, but the bottom line is some of the southern West Virginia coal is the best in the world. It is wonderful high-grade metallurgical coal that all other countries need. Much of it is being exported. High value, $200 a ton coal versus what we call steam coal, or the coal that goes to power plants, lower quality. So I think that we're going to continue to see metallurgical coal being mined, and certainly less of the steam coal. And of course, that's what we've seen over the last 10 years. Wouldn't you agree, Carl?
Clearly, the met coal is, I think met coal is what's keeping the few remaining coal producers alive at this point, at least in the southern part of the coal fields in Virginia and southern West Virginia for sure.
Anyway, I don't know how many more you want, Sven, but yeah. So one, just,
I think let's just do one more and then wrap it up. We have a couple more minutes, and that'll be our hour. So maybe just take one more question.
one from, well, the one from Darmody, I think, is easy to answer, but this other one is substance drug use by mining workers in Appalachia is missing in the book. Again, this wasn't a treatise on all the health effects of miners or other people in the southern counties. We were looking at some very broad health metrics across counties in an effort to see if there were some discrepancies and differences, which we surely did show. But we certainly didn't get to that level of looking at how many, what drug abuse was going on with certain entities or in certain counties.
That's right. Although we did review the statistics on various health metrics.
Yes.
And the category that includes opioids and drug abuse in the high coal counties has higher rates of fatalities for that purpose from those sources than other comparative areas, and that's very clear. And we do review that in the human health chapter, although not specifically with respect to coal miners.
All right. Well, thank you again, Jeff. Thank you, Carl. It's really been very enlightening and very interesting. And I will make sure that there is a copy available to anybody that wants it at the library. And so that, again, thanks, and hope to see some of you next week at our next iteration of our seminar series. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, way to go, Carl. All right, we'll see you guys.
There, Jeff. Wait.
So I've got a recording of this, and I'll put it on, I'll make a YouTube video out of it.
Okay.